Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming here. And
Thank you for coming here. I
it's
live here, so
that's
yeah.
right. I keep getting confused. So I have a lot of questions, but I want to start with one actually bringing from what Tarek were talking about the fact that I actually even talked to some of your classmates,
Mhm.
saying in your first year, right, when Andy Jassy pitched you a project that didn't even have a name yet, and that's what would have become AWS.
Yeah,
And they told me that they were all asking you, really, really, that is that what you want to do? So it clearly didn't look appeals to anybody else. But
yeah,
how did you take a chance, and what did you find intriguing?
yeah. So I actually did came 2005 came for my internship here, and actually when we came to the day where a lot of companies were or a lot of the teams inside of Amazon, there was a bunch of the MBA students that came and they were kind of pitching the different businesses you could work on, and Andy actually was there pitching at the time, and Andy Jassy, and he basically said, we're doing a startup. It's going to be technology heavy, but we're going to be starting a new business, and I can't tell you anything more about it than that. And I thought that sounded exactly what I wanted to do. And all the rest of my classmates were like, that sounds too risky, and I want to go work on sporting goods or, something in the retail big Amazon. And so no one else kind of raised their hand and said they wanted to go on that work on that business. And so, but I did. No, I was coming from a different spot. I had been in technology startups before. This is entirely intriguing to me, and I liked the technology aspect of it. And so I did that as an internship, kind of looking at we're building a bunch of these services internal because we hadn't launched them yet in 2005, and thought it was a fascinating opportunity. It seemed kind of crazy, and at the time, it actually seemed quite crazy and wasn't super obvious that this was going to be a big business at all. But I was intrigued and excited about it, and wanted to come back. And as I told my classmates, kind of once I started, because the very first AWS service launched about 3 months before we started, and so I pointed to it and said, like, that's the things I'm going to go work on. And everyone's kind of like, okay, but the safer route is to go work for Procter and Gamble or to go work for McKinsey, or something like a thing that people do as you go to business school, or even at Amazon to kind of go work for one of the retail businesses. And I was like, well, that's something I want to go work on. So that's what I did.
So that's amazing. And now a lot of the people in the room here are working in the AWS. So clearly you opened. But let me ask you another thing, right? When you start at the beginning, AWS was probably more like it felt more like a startup than what it is now. And you had to move roles from engineering, operation, and sales.
Mm-hmm.
And we tell our students these days you have to be able to pivot, to change in this world. So how did you move out of your comfort zone? How did you adapt in all these different roles?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for a long time, I was just working on stuff that I knew nothing about, and you just have to be. I was just comfortable doing that. I think if you think about in a startup, a lot of what you're asked to do is to go drive a business, and sometimes that means working on product. Sometimes that means really understanding deep technology problems. Sometimes it means marketing stuff. Sometimes it means picking up the pizza boxes afterwards and cleaning up the room, and I did all of those things and had to learn a lot of them and had a lot of mistakes along the way. And I think one of the keys is to not be afraid of trying different things. I think when I first went from product management was something that I was somewhat familiar with and comfortable doing, which is kind of what I did. So the first year that I worked at AWS, I was the product manager for AWS. And so I was product manager for every AWS service, and I did a bunch of different things and learned a bunch of the services. And then I started moving into owning engineering teams, and I had to learn a lot about. I didn't know anything about engineering teams, so I think one of the key things to think about is not being afraid to admit that you don't know something and jump in and learn. It's not like a black mark if you say I don't know how to do X thing. I consider it be much worse if you pretend to know and then people count on you knowing and you mess it up. If you don't know at the beginning and you say, hey, look, I don't know how software development works, or I don't know how operations work. Can you explain to me how we think about learning, how that works? I think most people are actually quite willing to walk you through what that means. And I did that across a range of things. I sat down with our hypervisor engineers and I was like, can you explain to me how a hypervisor works? By the way, I've been like the furthest away from knowing how a hypervisor worked before that. But I sat down and I like looked up some articles and started to read about how the technology works and understood it. And then, I think, look, was able to actually connect some dots and say like, hey, this is pretty valuable. Have we thought about why this might be valuable in a totally different area? And connecting some of those dots that were different than the very deep engineers. And I found where I'd ask dumb questions and I'd find, 50% of the time the team would look at me and go like, that's actually not a dumb question. I don't know why it works that way. We'll come back and let you know. Or that is an interesting observation. We'd be happy to explore that. So I think sometimes kind of jumping into things you're not familiar with can be a strength because you don't have the lens of the preconceptions that everyone else has of how things are supposed to work. And when we started AWS, we did a lot of things how you weren't supposed to do them, and we broke a lot of the ways that traditional technology had worked for 40 or 50 years beforehand. So I think that was helpful, and I kept doing that. I still continue to do that today. I kind of fast forward another 10, 12 years after that, and I had been leading now some of the largest engineering teams in Amazon, and one day Andy asked me to go lead sales and marketing for AWS, and I knew nothing about sales and marketing. In fact, I was like, really, you want me to do that? I don't know anything about it. And he's like, yeah, it'll be fine. It's just like all the other stuff. You just go learn it. So that's what I did. I did that for 3 or 4 years too. So I think any of these things, all these things are very learnable, and you just have to be willing to go and dive and be curious about how they work.
Actually, I love that because we always say how the Kellogg culture is low ego and humility, and that's how it transfers in helping you and ask questions. But another thing also about Kellogg I want to see here, because of course, I was saying AWS is now so much bigger, but my understanding is you still have very much a startup ethos of focus on the customers. So how do you lead your team to really understand the customers versus trying to sell the customers?
Well, those are a couple different questions. I think on the customer point, there's a couple different things. One is we do like to push our teams to think about it like being the world's largest startup. And practically speaking, when you're really running a business that's earning $3 a day, it's not that hard to convince your team that you should operate like a startup. In fact, there's many times where we asked ourselves like, is this business really worth it? But I
would say so.
But at $3 a day, it's a good question to ask. But now we're at 120 billion run rate, something like that. So it's hard to say you're a startup, but it is that mentality of how do you make sure that you can iterate quickly? How do you make sure that you don't have lots of layers of bureaucracy? How do you make sure that you push decision making down to the lowest parts of the organization so that you can really move fast? And part of that then leads into the second part of your question, which is you want decision making to really be pushed down to the people that are closest to customers. And I think the optimal organizational structure is for all parts of the team to be as close to customers as possible. And so I think a flat organizational structure, to the extent that you can do it, really drives rapid decision making. It drives innovation because you get a lot of that feedback. And so number one is thinking about how do you continue to flatten out organizations so that more and more of the broader company can be closer to the end customer. And number two is how do you build mechanisms so that even if you're not at the bottom line, the line that's working directly with customers, that you find time to spend time with customers. Because I think there is no substitute for direct customer interaction. And I think one of the we have this idea, this building is called Day One. And this idea of day one is you get this direct customer interaction. And what you don't want is customer feedback through proxies. And I think that's this idea of, I don't want somebody else telling someone else what a customer said, and they're telling a customer what they said, and then I think that I've talked directly to a customer in my mind. And so that implies it applies both to third parties. As much as, again, not to pick on you, as much as I love working with McKinsey, I don't want them to tell me what customers are saying. I want to hear it directly from them because I don't want it filtered through another proxy. And I don't want it filtered through a proxy of, a product manager and then a director talked to a customer and they told me what customers say. And so it filters that. So personally, as soon as I took over this job, I set up a mechanism where about once a month, I go and actually talk one-on-one with startups. And I sit down with founders, I sit down with founding teams, and learn a little bit about what they're building, what they like about our services, what they don't like about our services, what they wish we were building, what other things, cool things they see out there, what technologies they're excited about, and then I do that, and I probably do at least 10 customer meetings a week with enterprises as well, where just, sometimes it's more tactical about things we're working together, but other times it's just relationship building and understanding the challenges that they're facing, what they're worried about, what they're worried about in the economy, what they're worried about with their own businesses, what they're worried about as they think about their reinvention and how they're trying to modernize, and then that helps me kind of connect the dots with a bunch of what our teams are saying and what I hear, and help me kind of continue to make sure I kind of have a pulse on our customers to make sure that we're always thinking about building the right thing and not just building something because it's cool or building something because our own echo chamber kind of thinks it's the right thing to do.
That's fantastic. So you're talking to a lot of customers, but now you have over 1 million customers, and they trust you with some of their most critical functions. So what keeps you awake at night? And on the other side, what excites you about what is about to come?
Yeah. Well, I fortunately sleep okay, so that
Good.
Well, that's probably not really what you're asking, but generally it is okay. But it does, like, I do think that, and mostly because our team spends a lot of time thinking about, we often say priority 0 is security and priority 1 is operational excellence. And we kind of think about, it is from the very beginning when we started AWS, we thought about building this business as we realized that at the time we were, early on, we were mostly working with startups, but now it's enterprises, now it's governments, now it's, every it's healthcare, it's financial services, these are airlines. And so we know that these businesses are trusting us with mission critical systems. And so that are critical to their business, that if they fail, the businesses will fail. And so we take that incredibly seriously. It means that security and operational excellence are the 2 most important features that we ship for every single thing that we do. And so you got to think about that and think about how important that is and how you build really belts and suspenders and extra audits around all that to make sure that you do an outstanding job. And it doesn't mean you're going to do it perfect, but it's got to be kind of how you think about that each and every day, and make sure that your teams and your organizations are aligned around ensuring that's great. And then you also have to keep innovating on new capabilities and features. But that I think that ethos of from the very beginning of everything that we built, everything that we build, thinks about those first and foremost. It gives you a really solid foundation. I think what we have found at least is that if you focus on, all right, that's going to slow me down, I'm going to run really fast and build features because I can't focus on security and great operations yet. You find that actually slows you down in the long run, because trying to bolt those things on after the fact is orders of magnitude more work. You lose the trust of customers, and it turns out to actually slow you down because you have to try to go fix things after the fact. And so it's just how we started the business, how we always run the business, and I think it served us well. And then then you also mess up. You're also very transparent with customers, and you let them know this is what we learned from where we made mistakes and how we're going to keep getting better from where we're at.
And what excites you?
What excites me? There's a lot that excites me. I do love, like, the single thing that excites me the most, probably, if I was to distill it down, is I do get excited about helping us solve customer problems. Like, it's super cool to see when you can enable a business, whether it's a 2-person startup, whether it's a 100-year-old enterprise, whether it's a government agency that is able to accomplish something that they never would have been able to do before, without the capabilities that we're giving them. It's pretty fun, and to see the impact that we're able to have, because it's not just an isolated thing, but AWS is such a broad platform with today such a broad reach to impact really industry-wide and worldwide. That is also fun to see. And so I love seeing how we can impact customers, and like some of the things I get most excited about is how we can innovate and build new services and capabilities for those customers, where we can go invent so that we can solve problems for them. And this is one of my favorite things to do, which is listen to all these customers, understand what problems they're facing, understand the challenges they have, and then connect the dots to solving those problems in a interesting or unique way that maybe they didn't expect, or that's even better than what they typically ask for, and then seeing them delight in that and us actually go solve problems. So that's what I get excited about doing.
I have to say, it does sound exciting.
Yeah, I do. I do get excited about it.
So, through your partnership with Anthropic and other model providers, your own model, Nova, what have you learned about developing AI in a responsible way? And when you look at others, how do you figure out whether they are developing it in a responsible way?
It's a good question, and it's probably a question there's no like crisp answer to, other than it's I think most of the model providers that we work with are pretty aligned that it is critical to the long-term success of AI and frankly, I think general society, to make sure that we develop this technology in a responsible way where we can deliver outsized returns, like really incredible results in efficiency and effectiveness and discovery and innovation, while we limit the downsides of what's there. And I think there's a couple of ways when you think about responsible AI. There's the somewhat obvious examples of like, I don't want you to be able to use this model to create bioweapons, and I think almost every provider is pretty aligned that they don't want them to do that. And so I think the other, the continuum though is also like, how do you think about AI that can be responsible in the context of a customer or an enterprise or someone who's using it? And that, I think, for us is where we focus a lot, because I think a lot of the model providers, and our role as a model provider, I guess we can put us in that same bucket too, where we really want to think about, how do we make sure that we have guardrails and controls and classifiers and things all around things, so you can make sure that your model is used in a safe and responsible way. I do think that there are fuzzy lines as to what people consider to be safe and responsible, all the way from like bioweapons to, I don't want it to have racial slurs or anything like that. And there's a continuum across what you consider to be safe and responsible versus just not what I want from my application. And so that we also focus a lot on how, when a customer implements it, they can decide what they want to be safe too. And so, because as an example, one thing is if you have an AI system that's being implemented by a bank, they may want it to be able to answer and interact with customers about how do you open an account and how do you get information, and they may not want it to give financial advice, because that is actually like legally binding and they can get in trouble if they give bad financial advice. And so for them, responsible, safe AI is like, how do I ensure that the model doesn't give financial advice? And same from a healthcare, right? You don't want it necessarily recommending drugs that you should go take, like that has particular legal ramifications. And so what we also try to do is, how do you build a model that can be, and a capability that can be adapted to the application that it's built in. And I think increasingly our view is that AI is going to change every single industry, every single workload, every single job function. And we want to be able to have the right robust sets of platforms and tools that allow every single company to be able to build it and have the controls around it so that they can use the technology in a responsible way.
So that's a great answer, and I wish we could go on and talk about that, but I am seeing signs with
Good. Great.
So I want to ask you a question about Kellogg, though, because we have a room full of alums at Kellogg. I see some faces I know, some new faces, some people who just graduated, so they must have literally just started.
Right.
So, it's a question I often hear as a dean, and this as well with AI, the advancing rapidly, disruption to education and what to study.
Yeah.
Why should a student still pursue an MBA at Kellogg?
Yeah.
And I hope you're going to tell them that they should. Please don't tell me that they should.
You didn't check with me ahead of time, so it's.
I know.
Yeah. Well, look, I in many ways, I actually think it's all the more reason to go to somewhere like Kellogg, because I do think that with AI, there's a lot of things that you learn whether it's in undergrad or any sort of graduate school, and in business school, I think one of the things you learn in particular is one of the most valuable things for me, by the way, and I don't think everyone necessarily thinks the same, but for me, it's kind of how to think. And I think problem solving, how do you think cross-functionally, how do you work on connecting those dots? That is going to be, in my mind, a skill set that's going to be much more valuable than like, how do you correctly like construct a business plan? Like that's probably like a largely skill that's not really going to need more than like 3 minutes as to how do you prompt a AI system and it'll write a business plan for you. But it's how do you execute? And really it comes down to, if you think about actually if you think about businesses, it's not the ideas. Like ideas are like it's very rare that you have a novel idea. Sun had the idea for AWS like 20 years before we launched AWS, roughly speaking. Like I don't know, is that the exact same idea, but generally thinking that Sun had this idea where you could have a thumb drive and you can go plug it in, it would be your workstation and it would be a virtual workstation or whatever. And the technology wasn't ready and the implementation they didn't exactly get right, and it went away. Didn't become a thing, right? And so it's like you have to, a lot of things have to land, you have to execute right, the technology has to be there. And so it's much more, the idea is not necessarily the magic. It's kind of how do you go execute, how do you connect dots between a bunch of different things, and how do you cross-functionally go solve problems. And I think that is a thing that you can learn at business school, that you do learn at business school. And I think if I think about the things that I learned in class that I leverage on a daily basis, it probably rounds to zero. But it's the way of thinking that is helpful. It's the people that you meet in those environments, the way that you think about kind of building up a way of solving problems, that I think is a valuable thing that you get from whether it's going to business school or studying engineering in undergrad or any of those type of things. Like I don't think those go away just because there's AI systems that can do some of those pieces. In fact, I think that level of skill is what becomes much, much, much more valuable, because the tactical pieces will go away. Like you don't really need to figure out how to balance an accounting sheet anymore. Like that part can probably be done for you. But the way of thinking, I think, is something that is a skill that's going to be even more valuable.
So I'm going to quote you from now on all the time. Anybody asks me that question.
That's great.
Let me ask you, however, one more.
I want a commission for the people.
Yes. You can come back.
Okay.
So still on that line, you were already a trained industrial engineer from Stanford, like you were mentioning, when you arrived at Kellogg. So the technical part was coming from your undergraduate.
Yeah.
And I know you already said a little bit about the thinking, but really, what do you think at Kellogg made the key difference for your career?
Key difference for my career. I don't know if there's any one thing. I don't know if I can like point to like one specific thing that was like, this was like a magical unlock for my career. I mean, I guess I got an internship with Amazon, but I guess that was like a tactical thing. But look, I don't know that it's any different than I was explaining. Like I do think, look, it's not definitely not like the technical skills that I learned at Kellogg. It's not a skill thing it was. I do think like the people aspects I think was quite valuable. The networking aspects are valuable. I think there's also in some ways like an intangible thing of just kind of career resetting, where you can kind of think a little bit, like taking 2 years off to get to think about what you really want to do next and how you want to think about the next step of your career, as opposed to just kind of like iterating on where you're at. I think that was probably helpful for me to think about what I really wanted to get for the next stage of my career. Even though my plan was not exactly right, just that thinking I think was useful. My original plan, by the way, was I'd said that I had done startups. I was very interested in learning how bigger companies innovated inside of them. And so I wanted to go to a bigger company like an Amazon or Google or somewhere that kind of, invents new products internally, see how they do it, and then go back to do a startup after about 3 years. So except for that last part, I was successful, but I didn't quite leave after 3 years. But yeah, I think I do think all of those things lead into it. I don't ever think that there's any one thing that you can point to that is like a key to, it's kind of a combination of all factors that eventually kind of lead you to where you are. And, every decision you make every day can kind of change what you do. So I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect answer, actually. I like that. I'll keep quoting you also about that. Now, I have a few questions that were coming from I think we asked in advance from the audience. So they're saying, one question says, when thinking about people, who are trying to advance in their career and expand their sphere of influence and you look at what they're doing. Is there something that surprises you about something they are not doing? Like something that is second nature to you and you see them not doing? Like what is?
It's a good question. I think one, I am always surprised where people are afraid to take career risks. And I think particularly where those of us like in the room here are like highly educated, like have good backgrounds, have a good work history, like taking a career risk seems to be like the least risky thing you can actually do. And I find it pretty common where people get nervous about taking what they consider to be a career risk. And, I think there was actually, I remember there was actually remember the name of the gentleman, but it was a Kellogg session that I was at where there was you had these industry speakers that come in and one of the guys said that he said he doesn't want to take zero risks. He just wants to get paid for the risks that he takes. And so, because it turns out that you get higher returns if you take risk.
Yes.
You just want to be paid appropriately for those. And it doesn't mean you're always going to they will always work out. But, you're unlikely to actually kind of be wildly successful taking zero risks, just because it's just you won't get paid for that.
That's a great suggestion. I'm gonna go back and tell every student to take no risks, but check on the returns.
That's right. It has to be, but they're not. It can't be dumb risks, right? I mean, but I mean, it can be dumb risks. You can do whatever you want. But yeah.
Were you aware? Sorry, this is when you joined here, when you came for AWS. Did you see it as a risk, or you? Because everybody else seemed to think so. That's what they were saying.
I did not.
You did not.
No. I figured if it didn't work, I would get another job.
You're right.
It's like pretty low risk. Like it's like I don't know. That's I kind of viewed it as that way. I was like, I don't know if I mean I'd had this before. Like I had worked at startups. My first startup, when I right out of undergrad, I was like in Silicon Valley. So the cool thing was to go work for a startup, which I did, and it wasn't a great startup. And I think we raised $27 million, which at the time was a lot. Today is like a rounding error to raise. But it was a lot, and we wasted it all in 18 months and went out of business. And I took 3 months off to golf with my friends, and then went and got another job. It was kind of like, I don't know, I'll just do that. It'll be fine. And it probably wasn't 3 months actually. It was probably like a month and a half to 2 months, and I started getting really bored, and then I went and found another job. But I think and by the way, coming and working for Amazon seemed way less risky than that.
I see, definitely.
So yeah, but I think everybody has their own kind of risk tolerance and what they're excited about or not. I guess maybe I'm always optimistic that things will work out.
That's a great feature to have if you're taking risk. So another question says, what's the hardest transition among the roles you've taken? How did you overcome and grow from it? And then I have a last part, but let you talk about this.
On the risk side too, I had a backup because my wife was also at Kellogg at the same time. So worst case, I go out of business, we can live off her salary.
Exactly.
So we went to Kellogg together. So that was.
We have a very, very large abundance of Kellogg couples.
Yeah. Well, we were married before we came in. Even,
so. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Can you repeat your question? Sorry.
Yes. Sorry.
I distracted myself.
We got yeah. So. What's the hardest transition among the roles you've taken, and how did you overcome and grow from it?
Yeah, the hardest one was probably when I took on the sales and marketing job. I had been leading product and engineering it had been probably 13 years at that time, and so I'd grown up with AWS, and I knew pretty much everything there was to know about the services, and I'd built our compute services and a bunch of our storage services, and led a bunch of those teams and learned a bunch of that for well over a decade. And then transitioning to leading the sales teams, it was challenging on a number of different fronts. I would say the number of people that I was managing went up by an order of magnitude. I probably went from, order of magnitudes like 5,000 people to 50,000 people or something like that. And so it was a lot more people and very different motivations. So kind of thinking about how do you motivate and work with a global sales team was very different than how you think about kernel engineers. And just their motivations were different, and the things they get excited about are different. And so there was a lot of learning there, and the domains were quite different. Kind of learning how all of the pieces fit together. I had to just kind of completely start over from scratch, really. And so it was like I didn't understand how marketing and sales and post-sales support and customer service and all of those things kind of really fit together. And it took, they're actually like complex machinery that drives, turns out when you have, at the time it was about, I want to say $40 or $50 billion business, for maybe $30 billion business when I took over the sales marketing, 40 billion. And, it was interesting at the time. I went from, basically the ask was, you've never led a single sales and marketing team before, and now you have, one of the 3 to 4 largest enterprise sales teams in the world that you're managing. And so that was kind of a relatively big ask for me to go and kind of learn on the fly, where there was actually a lot at stake. So that was challenging. It was fun. I liked doing it, but that was hard because I had to just, I couldn't really afford to kind of fumble that, because at that point, AWS was important to the business, as opposed to like when we started AWS, again, it was $3 a day. Amazon,
nobody cared.
Didn't really care. $3, $6, $0 didn't really matter. The difference between 50 billion and 100 billion or 0 billion is material.
And, as a continuation, there was a third part, which was, what are the things that made you be part of a company for almost 20 years?
Yeah, coming up on 20. Like I said, I never intended to stay at Amazon for longer than 3, maybe 4 years. And I look, when you run across an opportunity or a business that is exciting and can change the world and has the kind of scale and scope that ours did, it's hard to say no to that opportunity. Just because from my perspective, I really wanted to build interesting things and have impact and the more I got to see the scale and scope that we got to work on, the more I saw there was nothing else that kind of compared when I don't know, other things I could do. And I will say it's not like it's the same job for 20 years. It was, every 6 months. I think in some ways, actually one time about 5 or 6 years ago, somebody asked me, they're like, how are you able to manage the scale and complexity of AWS? And I was like, I never really thought about it, but if you think about it, I had this luxury where when I started, it was a relatively simple problem. And then it got 1% harder every single week for the next 20 years, compounded. And so every week it was just 1% harder than last week. So I could do that. So the scale and complexity kind of got more and more. And so at the end of the day, you look up and it does seem like a large hard business to run, but it also means that there's a lot for me to learn in there. There's a lot new when you have a business that's getting 1% bigger or more complex or different every single week. It's not really boring. It's not that problems this week are not the same problems as last week, or definitely not the same problems as last year. And for me, it's a lot of different jobs. It was like, even though for the first 13 years at Amazon, I don't think I ever changed jobs. And I went from managing 0 people to managing thousands of people and managing lots of services, because every day just add a little bit more. And so I think that's, it was useful. So I got lucky in that we kind of landed on the right ingredients where the business really exploded and kept growing and didn't really slow down or get harder or get boring. It didn't stagnate. And so for me, it felt like a lot of different jobs where I got to learn a lot of different things.
Do you feel you have to do the same for the people that report to you to just make it interesting for them? Or
well, I would hope to say that the business has not yet slowed down. So we're still growing at something like 18, 19%. I can't remember where we're at right now, 17, 18%. And an interesting thing, I looked this last year. we added more revenue in AWS than like the size of Oracle or Google Cloud. And so like one of our major competitors is we basically added that much revenue in a single year. And they're like of their entire company that they've been working for 30 years. And so that is just massive growth, massive complexity, and massive opportunity. And every year we're adding more, revenue on top of that. And so, I think that opportunity is, we are still at the very earliest stages of what this business can be. When we talk to the team, we really are thinking about not, we're not high-fiving the fact that we're a $120 billion business, but we're thinking about how do we continue to evolve so that we can be a $300 billion and a $500 billion a year business. And if you think about, the size of the business today in the context of being a $500 billion business, there's a massive amount of change and growth and things that we have to do differently at a scale that's 3 to 5x where we are today. And so I think there's just as much, if not more, opportunity than there ever has been.
Okay, if you continue this way, I'm going to come to work for you because it's making you look so interesting.
Great.
Yeah, maybe you don't want to hire me, but that's fine. So I have one more question about going back to the MBA and in a world where AI takes in a predominant role, and we can create general business plans in a way, and change it.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it that like a business school like Kellogg should do to prepare people? I mean, you said, thinking about what else? I'm very interested in what is your answer.
Well, look, I think that's the single biggest challenge with Kellogg right now is that the keg doesn't exist anymore. So that is a big problem.
What do you mean we don't have?
The keg went out of business. So I find that to be a really, the kids are just graduating. I have no idea what that even is probably, but it's fine. What's that? It's an important insight. It used to be the late night bar that went out of business from when I was still in school. But anyway.
Okay, new bar.
A new late night bar is incredibly important. Yeah. Look, I think, like I said, I think AI is an incredibly powerful tool. It is, and generative AI is a transformational technology, which is once every decade or 2 or 3, we see kind of transformational technologies, whether it's the internet, whether it's cloud, whether it's AI, that just fundamentally change how applications work, how jobs work, how industries work. And I do believe that AI is that impactful. And you just have to think a little, I mean, the question is like, hey, the internet exists now. Do you not need to get an MBA anymore? It's not a question that you ask. You just use differently. And now all of a sudden, like a lot of the things you think about, use the internet. And I think AI doesn't necessarily change that. You just adjust the things that you learn and you use that tool. And I'd encourage people to lean into that. It's a super valuable technology, but I think that learning how to use that technology, learning how to think about how you can leverage what you do. Like if I think about, when I came out of school and I was a product manager, I think I would have been able to do like 3 times as much work as I could do today if I had AI. And it's not that I would have just asked ChatGPT to write a business plan for me and say like, this is the new AWS service we're going to launch. Like, I think if you do that, then you're just not doing the right thing and you're not thinking intelligently about it. But if I could have leveraged it to help me write narratives much more quickly, or to come up with mock-ups much more quickly, or iterate with my, and much more quickly with the team, I could have maybe even had a bigger impact than I did early on in my career. And so I think, if anything, kind of folks coming out of business school should lean into those tools and just think about how they can help you force multiply what you're able to accomplish early on in your career.
I'm at the end of my questions, and I'm sorry I can't go on, because what I have to say, what is so great when I talk to alums like you is that what you talk and the vision is really what I hear from students when they arrive now, they're graduating now, it's still the same culture. I love it. We started from the humility, the ability of thinking, the ability of connection, and of course the bars, because you're right, that is also very much part of the Kellogg culture, having fun. So it's just amazing to hear what you're saying and to be here with so many other Kellogg alums, and we are very proud that you're a Kellogg alum. I'm telling everybody.
Great.
So thank you so much.
I'm proud as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this. Thank you.
Do we have a couple minutes to do questions?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Who would like to raise their hands? We have time for maybe one or two, depending on how tough the questions are.
Oh, there's one there. Here.
Hey there.
Hi.
I started 2.5 months ago, so I consider myself an intern pro plus.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Nice. Welcome.
There was an interview that you did in January of this year with Nilay Patel from The Quarter, and there's a quote that stood out for me.
Uh-oh.
You said there, I am less interested in puffery and the press and more interested in how I can help customers achieve actual outcomes. And the back and forth that brought you to this quote was the whole AGI kind of like goal and how is it defined and, who really cares about it.
Yeah.
So the question is, now AWS is the world's biggest startup, right? So how do you apply that philosophy in terms of execution when trends are moving so fast? You have a conference every year in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And every time you talk, someone writes a headline about it.
Yeah.
So that's
look, I don't know if I have a magic answer other than I think the laser focus for us has to be how do we help our customers get value out of what they're doing? And I think if we just try to shove technology down customers' throats and try to like force them to use new services without focusing on where they get real value, and the more you can understand where they're coming from and where the customers where their real their ROI is, if they're going to spend $1 on an AWS service, how does their business get $3 back? Whether it's cost savings, whether it's new sales, whether it's efficiency gains, whatever it is. And if we have that focus that we're driving value for customers and not just trying to do sales, I think the right things will happen. Great.
Hi there. I don't work at Amazon, so
it's okay.
I'm not even the Kellogg alum, but I'm Northwestern alum. But it's very interesting to me that you entered this business, you were making $0 to $3 a day, and you knew to keep going, or something was guiding you to keep going. Was there a lot happening in the world where it was just like so clear this was going to be a massive business that you just knew in your heart to keep going? And how do you kind of apply that to your current business as well, where you decide to keep going with something that you're kind of like, we're not sure if this is going to work?
Yeah, if anything, it was the inverse. There was a lot of signals that everybody told us we shouldn't do this. There's literally Business Week covers where it's like it's like a picture of Jeff Bezos and they're like, Wall Street just wants him to mind the store and not worry about this cloud thing. That's one of my favorite covers. We have that up somewhere. But look, we thought we were onto something, right? We would talk to customers and customers got super excited about this and they were inventing uses for the initial services were things like EC2 and S3 was compute and storage, and customers were building things that we didn't expect, and when we saw them kind of putting businesses on top of that, we kind of just had this sense that we have something that's interesting here. I have a story that I've relayed a number of times, but it was early on, and it was actually another Kellogg classmate where we were about 6 months into working here. We were having lunch. He was in another part of the company, and he's like, "Hey, how's the AWS thing going?" I was like, "Man, this thing is I think there's huge potential." He's like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah, I really think that someday this could be $1 billion business." And he was like, yeah, "That's pretty big. $1 billion is a lot." And I was like, "I know, but I think someday we could get there." And so we had, I was wrong. Obviously, it could be a little bit bigger, but it is we had a sense that it could be big. But I will tell you, we were also terrified every single day that Microsoft or Google was going to come into this business, because then they would come in and stomp us. How can they not see the potential? And they gave us a 5-6 year head start. It was the single biggest gift they could give us. But I think they were worried about cannibalizing their own business. There was a bunch of reasons why they didn't jump in and where they kind of had the more logical win in here, or for that matter, IBM or HP or whoever it was that were kind of the incumbents. And we just kept running. We're like, every day they don't join is awesome. And but there was a lot of signals that maybe we were wrong because they weren't jumping in, and investors told us not to, but customers told us that it was interesting, and we saw the adoption coming, and so we kept at it. Probably have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about how can we operate as the world's largest startup when we have such a heavy tail? I worked as a product manager for RDS, and the issue we had is that even if we want to make a tiny change that affected 1% of the user, that was millions of dollars and thousands of users. So it's hard to operate. Like startup is just 2 users, you shut it down, you forget about it. How can AWS or Amazon operate a startup with that baggage or that heavy long tail?
Well, what I will tell you is almost every startup in the world would love the inverse problem that you just called out. So think about that, which is like, now you're a startup, but you have millions of customers who are using your product and you have lots of impact that you can have, and that a small change can drive that much positive too. And so it does mean, like, anytime you have adoption, you can't just turn stuff off because you don't feel like it. Probably means it was the wrong business decision anyway if millions of customers or thousands of customers are telling you don't want to do something. And it doesn't mean that you can't find ways to innovate around that. And so you got to think about, how do you not disrupt this big company that you have, because there's a huge tailwind there. Like, you have a $100 billion plus business, that the broader AWS, that drives that. And I'm sure that every startup in the world would kill to have that as a tailwind. They wouldn't consider that a headwind. They would consider that a tailwind. And our job is to figure out how you take advantage of that. And how do you still move fast? How do you still innovate without breaking all of your existing customer base? And it does mean you've got to think about that. I agree with that. But it also means that when you get it right, you have the biggest tailwind in the world to actually go sell this to 1 million customers, as opposed to, like when we launched AWS, we literally had to explain to people why a bookseller would possibly want to sell them their compute infrastructure. You don't have to do that anymore. Like, we did have to, like, I'm not serious. I went to conferences and be like, can I tell you about AWS? And they're like, you guys sell books. Like, why would I buy storage from you? And they had to like go through this whole pitch, and they'd look at me weird and probably would say no. And so you don't have to do that anymore either. So there's a lot of other things that you get to do that are better than that. And so there's pros and cons, but most startups, just the idea, the mentality is move fast, innovate. Doesn't mean you can break the things that are there, but it doesn't mean you can't do those other things either.
And I'm afraid I'm reading here and
All right, end. It says end.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.